Okay, we're the 24th of August, in the middle of the night, and I have started to record my personal documents, namely the work that I mean, if we call this work, I don't know, but the work that I've been producing in order to make reality intelligible. So I will share what I call the Phänomenologie des Geistes, namely the phenomenal appearance, the phenomenal manifestation of Geist or spirit or mind. And this is how I view the world as of now. As you can see, this is a work in progress, and this is very simplified. It has consisted mostly in classifying names and categories of thought, of the natural sciences, politics, economics, sociology, art, etc. So that's why I do not consider this really work, although I have worked a lot to produce this, but it's not finished, it's kind of confused, so yeah. And the question, who am I? I know formal answers to this question. Reason, the negative, the concept, the idea. But if I had to express in the language of pop culture, what am I, politically at least, I would say that my heart is on the left and my head is on the right, and my head and my heart, well, that's a great song, yeah, and yeah. God is in the center. I know that's a very maybe difficult thought to grasp, even for myself, namely that I am not on anyone's side, although I am on both sides. I swing from one side to the other, I guess. That's a very difficult thought, because people who believe in God believe that God is on their side, but there are two sides. So it's kind of difficult, but whatever. So here in green we'll see what I call American spirits, in blue German spirits, in red French spirits, in kind of pink Anglo-Saxon spirits, although most of the Americans who appear here are of Anglo-Saxon descent, but non-American spirits, and in black the spirits of the dead. And this is structured according to the formal structure of the Enzyklopädie der Philosophischen Wissenschaften, namely it shows the structure of being. So here we have logic. I will not show all the categories, I will not explain what logic is. I have produced other videos, so I will put the link to the other videos. But yeah, I can zoom. Yeah, here are all the thought determinations which appear in the mind of God, but which are also determinations of ontology, namely of being, of the structure of reality. And here on the left and the right, here this is not yet political at all. These are just to balance. So in black, these are ancient Greek mathematicians, a German mathematician, English mathematicians, a Greek logician, and French logician. So these are just names that I've had the opportunity to pick, but actually I will maybe repeat this all along. All the names of all the great mathematicians, logicians, and even metaphysicians could be classified. I haven't had the opportunity to do so. So the names who appear on the far left, on the far right, as of now, these are dead scientists mostly, and here the names which appear on the left or on the right. Again, here it's not political, it's just I had to put them somewhere. These are YouTubers. She makes video about mathematics, he makes video about mathematics, so it's quite a high level intellectually, but their videos are available on YouTube. And she's or he is a German mathematician, I think, as well. So yeah, there are some flaws, like he should be higher, whatever. Here's the first part of the three-part structure of being, which is the process of God, namely the thought determinations, the categories, die Reflexionsbestimmungen, the concepts, which are determinations of the mind and also of reality. And here we enter the realm of die Naturphilosophie, namely the philosophy of nature, the realm of time, space, movement, matter, energy, the laws of physics, etc. And here, again, on the left, we have the name of some great physicists, mostly from the 20th century. And on the right, some former great physicists, great in geometry, because mathematics would be classified within logic, but geometry would be classified within the philosophy of nature, and great names: Copernicus, Tycho Brahe, Galileo, etc., etc., Newton. And here, those who are close to the center, they are living figures of consciousness, living minds. Sometimes I don't know their nationality, or I don't know how they identify. So here we have a modern English physicist, and the consciousness that the cosmos, the universe, the physical universe has of itself is being made present within the mind of these people. Whatever Mr. Cross says about God, maybe God played a trick on him, so because he has a great knowledge of the physical aspect of God from a theoretical standpoint. So these people, they know a lot about modern physics, so that's why they're here. But I could list all the modern theoretical physicists. Like here, I could list all the great dead physicists. I just put some name that I've had the opportunity to put here. So in green, in yellow and blue, these are the German words: die Mechanik, die Physik, Organische Physik. These are the German words which are the structure of the Enzyklopädie in three parts. So there is the philosophy of nature divided in Mechanik, Physik, Organische Physik. In green here, when it's written in German, Raum und Zeit, Materie und Bewegung, Absolute Mechanik. These are again the inner division, the inner parts of the Encyclopedia. And in clear blue, so it's written here in German, and in bold it's in English, and otherwise it's in French. In clear blue, these are the branches of the modern sciences, in this case physics. So it's just to show that in order to understand reality, all the knowledge gathered by geometry since the Greeks and even before, all the modern knowledge about relativity, quantum physics, astronomy, etc., optics, etc., could be added, and the people here, these are just examples of people who are, I guess, they know a lot about at least some branches, some aspects of these various sciences. So it's just the method of knowledge, basically. So all the knowledge accumulated by mankind officially over the millennia and the centuries could be added and is being made manifest through publications, books written by modern scientists, conferences, videos on the internet, etc. But it's I just showed the whole process in its totality without going into the details of all the various subdivisions, etc. But that's what it is supposed to mean. So all the knowledge of electromagnetism gathered by mankind is being made available on the internet, either for those who have the opportunity, leisure, time, or cognitive capability to buy books on electromagnetism or thermodynamics or climatology or whatever, or watching conferences, videos on YouTube or other social media. So for instance, here Maxwell, of course, I put him there because electromagnetism appears several times, but he could be put there. So yeah, this is just, I try to fill the content of the Encyclopedia with the modern categories of the sciences, and the whole knowledge of mankind, accumulated by mankind, is being made available. The only missing link, maybe that's the positive aspect of the negative, is to show the whole picture so that the people who have been accumulating knowledge might see their position and their role in the process. And just in case it's not clear, this is the structure of nature. Namely, nature is first determined spatially and temporally, filled with matter, movement, energy. This is a nature, as we would call it, cosmology, namely the solar system, the galaxies, and the movement of the planets, the movement of the galaxy, gravitational, reciprocal attraction, etc. So it's logically structured in a way. I'm not saying that it's perfect, because I am not an expert in all the topics, but I think I've studied enough of Hegel, or maybe not enough, but enough at least to see broadly. Namely, the Encyclopedia, the writings of Hegel, they present the formal structure of the process of being, and if the knowledge of the various branches, particular divisions of physics and chemistry, etc., are classified within the formal frame of the Encyclopedia, it can make things intelligible. I'm not saying, like I said, it's a work in progress, so I cannot confirm that it's perfectly rigorous, but at least it can clarify a little bit. Yeah, so here are famous scientists. There are very few people that I don't really know about, but most of them I vaguely know at least who they are or who they were. So here is Organische Physik, so the planet Earth, considered as a total organic body, basically. And this includes what we would call, these are examples, it can be subdivided, there are missing branches of science, but basically this is how to think about the Earth. This is what people call Gaia sometimes, or yeah, this is the ontological structure of planet Earth, and the knowledge which has been produced about the Earth through the minds of thinking minds, basically. So all the knowledge gathered by meteorology could be added here. Great dead meteorologists, maybe they were I don't know names of great meteorologists or great oceanographists or hydrologists or whatever, but all the modern knowledge could be added here. And here, when it's not in blue, these are simply categories vaguely which are used. So again, on the left it's in English, on the right it's in French. All the categories used in modern debates in public life. It's not fully, it's not complete. There are many categories lacking. It's just to illustrate that in the daily news or in the political debates or among people or in the political circles, people talk about these kind of topics, which would fit here within geological determinations. The struggle to acquire resources, oil, gas, metals, etc., etc., renewable energy. These are the kind of debates which structure the intellectual life of most developed countries daily. So they would fit here. It's just to see. Okay. Vegetabilische Natur, so that would be science of plants or botany or botanics. So here are the subdivisions which would be included. Bacteriology, microbiology, mycology. They do not appear as such within the encyclopedia, but in the modern categorization of the sciences and the organic sciences, this would fit here. I could have added someone like Dennett, but I think he's more of a philosopher. But here, This is, like I said, I repeat, the structure of being, namely how, in this case, organisms are. They are structured on a chemical, molecular, cellular, morphological level. The official story narrates the history of evolution, and these are some of the various branches of organic life, namely bacteria, fungi, and plants, and later we have animals. So yeah, Mr. Dawkins, your work has been very useful, Mr. Dawkins, to understand evolution, and which is not, it's dubious, but let us assume that the narrative is it's not necessarily true, but it's convincing in a way. So yeah, Darwin here, of course, and here we could have added all the great biologists, etc., and all the modern biologists, whether they are evolutionary biologists or not, etc., etc. Here are examples of modern people interested in botany. Here is animal organism. So here are the subsections, the subdivisions, the sub-branches of what we would call zoology in a broad sense. So it includes anatomy, physiology, etc., etc. And here are great either they are the doctors or scientists interested in pharmacology, epidemiology, immunology, or simply anatomy or physiology, or a classification like a Linné. Yeah, here he discovered microbes, microorganism. Yeah, and here are debates. So here are the branches in blue. These are the branches of science, and when it's not in blue, these are simply debates which shape and structure the modern public life, mostly in Western countries, but actually in most developed countries, I guess. The COVID, it's a determination of pathology, pharmacology, etc., etc., medicine eventually, and all the debates surrounding the COVID, if they had to be structured, they take place within the formal conceptual structure of the animal organism. Okay, and now we enter the realm of Geist, which is the soul, mind, consciousness, and spirits of humans and of God eventually. And here the divisions are more or less political. It can be very dubious sometimes, but it's the closer it is to the center, it's more the left, and the further away it's the far left. Here the same, the further it is, it's on the right, and the further away it's on the far right. And these are categories of logic here, which are in a conceptual unity, although they are differentiated or even opposed, and it's not strictly rigorous, but it's just to illustrate. So for instance, on the left we would have being, positive, identity. Identity comes before positive, but whatever. Being, positive, identity, matter, passive, and universality, which is it can be contradictory, because usually being passive is considered negative and matter is considered negative, and being active and the form are considered positive. So these are just illustration, but I put this here because leftists usually they are more materialist and more passive, and on the right they are more active. So here we would have the counterpart of being, which is nothing, which brings about difference and negativity. So it would be on the right, which is form, activity, and the moment of particularity, which is simply the negation or the differentiation of the universality. So these are some of the logical categories which belong together, although they are opposed. So that's a way of simplifying, but actually there is a lot of negativity on the left, there are positive aspects on the right, there are materialists on the right and idealists on the left, universalist on the right and particular differentiations on the left, etc. It's just to simplify it. That's why it's not very rigorous. It's just to give a view. And here, if we had to talk in images, good versus evil, usually good is on the left and evil is on the right, but there is evil on the left and good on the right as well. Feminine, masculine, yin and yang, order and chaos. So then again, it can be contradictory, because usually leftists, they are good but kind of chaotic, and right-wingers, they are considered to be evil, but they bring order and clarity of mind. So here's the heart is on the left, the mind is on the right, but it's way much complex than that. But I realize that when there is too much complexity, it's difficult to communicate. So I simplify dark and light. So the question really, why is a good on the left, but also darkness is on the left, and on the right, people most of the time think that they are evil, but they bring light. So it's not very rigorous. It could be inverted, but there are some determinations which really belong to the right, like negativity, form, activity, masculinity, order, and idealism. They are on the right. Also, they are idealist on the left, etc. But usually these are more determinations that are found on the right, basically. But this is not very rigorous. It's just to illustrate, and this will unfold for all the further determinations. So here are the branches of the sciences which deal with the study of the soul, the anthropological study of man, and the soul of man. And the soul of man is determined by the determinations precisely of all these sciences, namely the relationship to the climate, to the position of the planets, the socio-biological, demographic, anthropological, evolutionary, psychological determinations, etc., etc. So yeah. And now we are entering the realm of politics, one might say. So yeah, I have to zoom in order to, hopefully you can see. So here, like I said, it's more political, but it can be adopted because the determinations of the left can be put on the right, and the people which appear either on the left or on the right, here, for instance, their classification is not political in the sense that whatever their political affiliations as individuals are, it's kind of not important here. It's more the view that they develop in their scientific works, knowing that science is supposed to be in the center, to be beyond political divides. So here, in the realm of sociobiology, here are some categories which help divide the left-right paradigm, namely on the question of ethnocentrism. Usually, people on the left have a tendency to cooperate with strangers, and people on the right, they have more a tendency to focus on the in-group versus out-group divide. So on the left, they are more open. On the right, they are more closed, basically. And if we had to translate this in logical language, this would be universality is on the left and particularity is on the right. It's just an illustration. I will not do this for each category because I have published videos about logic, and I intend to publish more videos about logic. So here, also we have moral universalism, and here it's more tribalism. But I will not do this for every category, but just that there are tribalists on the left and moral universalists on the right. We will see this with libertarianism, which right-wing libertarianism, libertarianism is more usually thought of to be on the right, and the libertarians, they are moral universalists, and identity politics, as they call this, is on the left, although it's also on the right, but this is a form of tribalism. So that's why the determinations which are applied to the left wing or the left side, they can be applied on the right as well. But these are just broad tendencies. Usually, patriarchy is more on the right. Here we have reproductive strategy, namely R-selected versus K-selected. Namely, R-selected in biology is to have a lot of offspring, a quantitative, an important quantitative number of quantitative determination of offspring with lower investment in each offspring, and K-selected means high investment but fewer offspring. And this is a divide that we find in the realm of biology among species, but it has also an impact upon humans, because humans, precisely, they are zoological beings, basically. So yeah, here are the name of some modern sociobiologists. I will switch. Here is Kant. He was not a biologist, although he wrote about biology, but because he's a proponent of moral universalism. And on the right, these are anthropologists, basically. So here they are dead people, here they are still alive. Yeah. Okay. So here are, in the term of racial anthropology, these are some of the determinations of the divide: racial determinism, immigration, demographics, the question of racism, miscegenation, race science, and ideology. So here, for instance, I will not systematically comment everything, but at least at the beginning, on the left, usually they used to think in the moment of universality, namely for leftists, it's not always true, but the tendency, if we had to determine quantitatively with quantitative relationships, most leftists, a high proportion of leftists, would think that on the question of race, there is only one race, the human race, whereas on the right, they are more likely to think in terms of ethno-differentialism, namely the moment of particularity. And it could be said that identity is difference because those who preach universality, they defend identity politics and the right to difference, namely to welcome strangers and let them adopt or preserve their own particular determination. So the left talks about universality, identity, but they defend difference, and those on the right who advocate identity politics, usually for white, they call themselves ethno-differentialists, which is just a modern denomination for pro-race politics, let us call it that way. So identity defends difference, and differentiation is a mode of identity politics. They are conceptually united. On the question of immigration, here are some of the mottos that we find in the US or in the Western world. Diversity is our strength. We're all descendants of migrants, which in the long run, from an evolutionary perspective, is true. But then you have to apply quantitative determinations. Give me your tired, your poor, etc., etc. Here are some people who wrote about racial anthropology. Yeah, so here, this is the kind of things that I wrote. I haven't modified this for many weeks, but for instance, on the left, usually the typical white leftists, they say the Tibetans are being demographically replaced, and the typical white right-winger will say, me too. So the leftist, the white leftists, they care about the demographic replacement of Tibetans, for instance, but not about the great replacement theory, which they think is just a theory. And here is the divide, for instance, on the right. Here it's from moderate conservative to really right-wing and even far-right. So all the viewpoints, most of viewpoints are included. So on the conservative side, they think immigrants are good for the economy. The radical right, this is the kind of things that Trump spoke about. On the far right, they accuse immigrants of being invaders, basically. Yeah. And here on the question of racism, the conservative, they prefer to talk about business. The radical right, they say that it's okay to be white. So here it's specific to the Western world. And on the far right, most white trash believe that whites are a superior race, basically. Not only white trash, but it's prevalent among low class far right people, basically. Yeah. So here, then again, you see the determination. There are people who falsify the data, usually on the left, but on the right as well, historically. So it happens on both sides. Usually on the left, they promote epistemological anti-racism, namely color blindness in the realm of science, and on the right, scientific race realism, which has an impact upon politics, of course. Then we enter the realm of sex and gender differences. So it's logically structured according to the categories of the Enzyklopädie. So we had sociobiology, anthropology, and now we have gender differences. So here, usually on the left, there would be feminists advocating independent women, which I wrote. Independent women usually means dependent on the state. That's a secret. Maybe we're not supposed to say this, I don't know. And on the right, they are more mictos or incels. So here's an example of a modern leftist, feminist, which wrote good books. So here's the question of hypergamy. This is what right-wingers think mostly about women. Sometimes a little bit of humor can help diffuse tensions. They on the right, they secretly fantasize about Asian women, mostly white people, not all of them, but this is a view that Gerhard Meisenberg in his book In God's Image mentioned. And on the left, we'll see a lot of women secretly fantasize about black men. We just have to look at a pornographic website to see that, basically. Here feminism, first, second, third, and fourth wave feminism. So the first wave feminists, I simplify of course, but it's just to help show the process. They just wanted to live decently. Second wave, basically. So we have a little bit of excesses on the right, as well on the left, as well as on the right. So here's Stella, who made videos about femininity. In green, sometimes when they are green songs. This is here what. So women, they talk about feminism, emancipation from men, etc. But what most heterosexual women think about men, it could be found in this song, for instance. This is what women really think, basically. A song about toxic masculinity. So it can be unpleasant, but sometimes, as Britney said, people who watch this eventually might listen to the song. So here are more the biological differences, and here it's more sexuality as such. Here we find conservatives and white knights on the left. Although conservatives, they are supposed to be on the right, but actually they are on the left. Here are some YouTubers, traditional view. So these people are living YouTubers, and these people are dead thinkers about the question of femininity and traditional gender roles or masculinity, etc. Here, the views of sexuality. Usually, promiscuity is promoted on the on the left, and restraint on the right. On the question of marriage and divorce, they promote free love, whose consequence is broken households, mostly, and teenage pregnancy, single motherhood, etc., etc. On the right, usually they think that marriage is the bedrock of a healthy society, the building block of a functioning society. Usually sexual degeneracy is on the left, but there is sexual perversion on the right as well. So on the left, usually they think that the contraceptive pill is a blessing. On the right, they think that it's a curse. I simplify, but there are, of course, the opposite, etc., etc. So, condoms are an opportunity to have casual sex, and for some radical people, abortion even is an opportunity. For the hardcore Catholics, usually on the right, abortion is considered to be a murder. and the distinction is continuity versus discretion, precisely from which chronological moment does the fetus becomes a living person, and from when does it qualify as murder, etc., or whatever. Yeah, the question of pornography. Here are some modern feminist or LGBT, not feminists, but LGBTQ thinkers. Yeah, so, okay. Now we enter the realm of the Phänomenologie des Geistes, which is the second part of the first Abteilung, the first division. So here are some of the categories of the modern sciences. Here again, in the realm of psychology, here are some of the subdivisions. So here we could include the totality of all the study of all languages, linguistics, grammar, compared linguistic, comparative grammar, etc., etc., body language, etc., etc., studies about IQ, etc. So these are the branches of the sciences, and here it's more subdivided. So here, in the realm of psychology, on the question of neurobiology, here's a modern neurobiologist, here's a modern psychologist, Mr. Peterson. Here's a YouTuber who talks about psychology. Psychiatry. So here, I'm not sure that he's a leftist, but sometimes when it's neutral, it's kind of balanced. But Jordan Peterson, politically, is on the right, but as a scientist, he's supposed to be in the center. So that's why it's not, strictly speaking, always rigorous. And the name of all the great psychologists could be put either on the left or on the right, but he's just an example of a modern psychologist. Okay, psychiatry. Well, here Hegel comes into play, one might say. Some problems, some psychiatric problems, usually associated with the left, bipolar disorder, PTSD, but they are found on the right as well, and usually on the right, schizophrenia, paranoia, autism. They are autistic leftists, and paranoid leftists, schizophrenic leftists, but that's why it's not very rigorous. But these are examples. These are just examples. Here's a song to illustrate schizophrenia. Okay, psychoanalysis. Zizek, Slavoj. Well, I don't know what to say. I will laugh at this moment because whatever. The problems, the psychiatric problems on the right, they are too numerous to list. So let's pretend that they do not exist. Usually, hysteria is more on the left. Sadomasochism. Here are two great songs about or mostly masochistic tendencies. And most of Quentin Tarantino movies, they illustrate white masochism or white sadomasochism, basically. Here are some psychoanalysts. Here's a right-wing psychoanalysis. Nietzsche he was a psychoanalytical thinker to a certain extent. Here on the question of language, usually on the left, they adopt linguistic tolerance. They trust the spontaneity of the people, one might call this. And on the far left, they promote politically correct newspeak, which is just, or they denounce the negative aspect of language. But in the modern Western world, this is the right, which denounces newspeak and politically correct jargon. But historically, the left has done this because Orwell was kind of a leftist, although he was an intelligent leftist. So yeah. I'm not saying that a lot of leftists are intelligent, but Orwell was really smart, so he was a really smart leftist, which really smart people, usually they are more on the right, but yeah. Linguistic purism, so the common view on the right is more the aristocratic right, mostly in Europe, namely the idea that the elites should set the standards of language, which actually they do, because I didn't put it, but on the far right we could have the criticism of newspeak, because people on the right or on the left, they agree that language can be a means of oppression used by the ruling class. But here in this view, linguistic purism means the idea that language and grammar should be kept pure. And here I will just switch upward. This is tied with, for instance, in the realm of biology, this is tied with the idea of seeking to preserve purity. We find this in the mostly far-right circles in terms of biology, but it's also found in grammar, in the realm of the high bourgeois right-wingers or aristocratic right-wingers who, yeah. So here an example of someone who denounced the oppression of the language in the Third Reich. Usually liberal hypocrisy is on the left, mostly white liberal hypocrisy, and trash talking usually is on the right. Censorship usually is on the left, but there is censorship on the right as well, historically especially, but here are some modern psychologists or thinkers about the question of language. Humor, well, there's great Jewish humor. It's on the left, but it can be on the right, and German humor can be on the left as well. British humor would be in the middle. Everyone loves British humor, usually. German humor and Jewish humor, it's more controversial sometimes, but yeah. So intelligence and IQ. Here, for instance, we would have the determination of multiplicity, and here the determination of unity, which are logical determinations. So usually the scientists on the right, they think about the G factor, which is the one universal determination of intelligence. On the left, they advocate the theory of multiple intelligences. But since the many are one and the one is many, both views have to be taken into account. So here are some names of modern psychologists. These people in black, they passed away, and I think they're still alive. Lin and Rinderman, yes, Jensen also, I don't know, but his ideas are still alive at least. So here we have the question of race realism. Someone like Pierre Bourdieu denounced studies of IQ because he considered this to be intellectual racism. So yeah, the question of eugenics versus dysgenics. Usually people on the left, they reject eugenics, and in the fringes of the far left, from the point of view of the elite, they promote the genetic dumbing down of the population. And usually on the right, they favor eugenics, or even envision some sort of eugenic utopias, like Raymond Cattell and Francis Galton. So that's one of the line of divide. In the terms of the educational system, the same determination are found. Usually people on the left, they want equality of outcome, but some leftist elites use the educational system to dumb down the students. They want the child at the center, they want the system to be public. Yeah. So usually the moderate are here, and the schemers and the manipulators, they are on the far left or on the far right. So yeah, usually right-wingers seek excellence, authority of the teacher, privatization of the system, and there are left-wing socialist or left-wing critique of the educational system in the West, at least, as well as right-wing libertarian critiques. So yeah. Okay, now we enter the Abteilung, the division of der objektiver Geist, which is, strictly speaking, the realm of politics. And here are some determinations, what students of law are supposed to study, monetary theory, of criminology. So these are the branches of the social sciences, and here is some divide. So here some choices are questionable, but this is how I have envisioned things, and it can be debated, it has to be debated, but that's just my view, and there are a lot of missing points or whatever. But yeah, usually I talk briefly. Usually people on the left, they are liberal individualists, mostly in the West, mostly white leftists. They are liberal individualists in terms of morality, but in terms of property, they are collectivists on the left. But there are, so here there are the distinction of morality and property, which are determinations of right, and here the same. Usually people on the right, they are on the question of property, they are individualists, But on the question of morality, they are collectivist, in the sense that they want a strong sense of ethics for the whole community. Conservatives, they are moral collectivists and economic individualists. And on the left, of course, it's the opposite. But it's very simplified, but that's how things work. Classical liberalism, socialism, communism. What about human rights? On the left, it's one of the best ideas ever. On the right, the question is, what about the rights of the people, the native people? The rights of the natives, they are defended by the left in the names of human rights, but what about the rights of the native people who invented the human rights, namely Europeans mostly? So yeah, examples of collectivism on the right, fascism, of course, National Socialism, military collectivism, like Sparta, Rome, and Prussia in the 18th and partly 19th century. There is censorship on the right and on the left as well. But for the right, usually free speech is a God-given right, and for the radical members of the mostly European right, it's a product of the Nordic spirit. Yeah, about the gun ownership, on the left usually they are opposed because they think that guns kill people, and on the fringes, not on the fringes but on the radical right, they say it's not the guns who kill the people, it's the association of low IQ and high testosterone, basically. So that's a different perspective, but yeah. Yeah. Okay, morality. Here are some of, I just showed the debates which are being debated in the modern West. So here it's really typical of the modern Western life. Here's a person who made a video about being infiltrated in the alt-right. He's an Afro-American. A very interesting video on TED, a TED Talk. So he's in the middle. He has very wise views. So yeah, I don't know if he will watch this, but he succeeded the test. If it was a test, he won the test. He was not deceived by the dichotomies. So yeah. So here are some of the debates which are talked about. Here's another YouTuber every day, and the right-left divide. Well, here it can be controversial, but usually we have, on the question of political correctness, we have typical white liberal hypocrisy on the left and right-wing vulgarity on the right. So white liberals are hypocrites and right-wingers are vulgar. And I think that both would agree. Because what the right-wing whites keep saying to the left, basically, that you are such a bunch of hypocrites, and what the white liberals keep saying to the right, basically, is that you're just so vulgar. I mean, that's not how they formulate, but basically that's what they think. Anti-racism for people who can be a profitable way of making a living in the modern West. Here are some anti-racist thinkers. I do not accuse every anti-racist to be business-minded, but it's true that for a high proportion of intellectuals, I'm not saying that it's the case for them, but anti-racism can begin with a noble idea, but it can be a way to simply make money with whatever. So usually on the left, on the question of the woke ideology, etc., these are mostly white ethnomasochists, and they support these ideologies. On the right, they are more race realist, and they are more hostile. The entire establishment is made up of conservatives, like they call this. Yeah, and the racist, they are on the radical right. But actually, there are racists on the left as well, either non-white racists, which are tolerated by the left, or ethnomasochistic whites, who are racist against themselves in a way. So racism is on both sides. That's why anti-racism can turn, and eventually turns into racism, because someone like Martin Luther King would be in the middle. He would be non-racist, neither racist nor anti-racist. He would be beyond racism, basically. That was the message of Martin Luther King. So here we find the conservatives, Here's a little bit of a joke for white conservatives. Culture? What is culture anyway? Let's talk about business instead. This is what most white conservatives, not only in America, in the entire Western world, wherever there are white conservatives, what they think about is making money, basically. Culture. Let us leave that to the West, but they don't understand that. If you leave the culture to the West, they will take over the culture and implement their economic views, which will ruin the white conservatives, basically. I will laugh because white conservatives, they are really comical. Yeah, so here we have the alt-right. We used to be a Christian nation with Western values, and here the hard alt-right. So here are the name of some YouTubers. I'm not sure that Michael Jones belongs here, but whatever. It's not, like I said, it's not very rigorous. It's just a view. Yeah, a view. See, on the question of cultural Marxism, yeah, so here there are people on the radical left, people who say white people have no culture. Basically, white conservatives, they agree, kind of implicitly, so they agree with one another, basically. Cultural Marxism, so here are the name of cultural Marxists, and here are people who denounce cultural Marxism because it's dialectical, and it was, in the 1960s, it was undercover, and it is becoming conscious because people start to denounce cultural Marxism, but it becomes conscious of itself through the mediation of those who talk about this. This is why someone like Zizek, in a debate about with Peterson, says, but can you give me the names of the cultural Marxists? These are not the names of these people, but mostly most left-wing academics, they are cultural Marxists, and they can only become aware of this by the denunciation of cultural Marxism by probably right-wingers. Yeah. Okay, so here on the left we find these ideologies. Here we could put many names: Femen, Fat Pride, hippies, Islamo-leftists, which are mostly modern liberals and progressive. So that's again probably it's logically determined. Namely, liberals and progressives, when they are white, mostly, not only they are people of all origins, but mostly white, they adopt the most reactionary ideology. And here, reactionary is not it's negative from a chronological perspective. It's not necessarily negative morally. It's just that in the modern West, the most progressive, usually white leftists, they defend some of the most reactionary, in a neutral sense, ideology, namely Islam. We have anarchists, nihilists, yeah. So here there are conflicts within the left, because moderate leftists, if they are pro-enlightenment, liberals, etc., they reject radical Islam, but there are fringes on the left which embrace Islam or radical Islam. So there are conflicts on the left and as well as on the right. Then again, on the right, usually the Christian conservatives, they reject Islam in the name of what they call the Christian values. But on the far right, there are far right in the West who admire radical Islam. So there are an ambiguous relationship which is dialectically determined on the right as well as on the left. On the question of the Great Replacement, well, what the leftists think basically is it's about time, and on the right, well, they denounce this, or they talk about this at least. On the question of the boomers, usually young right-wingers are opposed to the boomers. The boomers, usually they are on the left. About whiteness, yeah, on the left, they claim to be opposed to white supremacy, but actually on the fringes of the left, they are opposed to white existence. I'm not saying that these people are, but a lot of white people are opposed to white existence. Not only white, but yeah. And so here's the official message, and what people really think. The official message of the conservative: we don't talk about race. And what they really think, okay, we nonetheless, we would like to preserve the white race, basically. Although they don't admit it. And on the far right, they talk about white preservationism, but what some people really think on the far right is basically white supremacy. So basically, they confirm the left in a way. Here with white guilt, it's like anti-racism. It's a profitable way of making a living for the conservatives. You just say that if you're a white person on the conservative side, you say that you feel guilty, which enables you to make a living by being in the news, in the newspapers, or selling books, whatever. Yeah. So, what I say, conservative, they say thank God for white guilt, because this is what enables the most conservative of the bourgeois establishment to make a living, basically. What would you do without white guilt? Yeah. Okay, on the question of terrorism, of course, people officially condemns, usually on the left, they condemn white terrorism, and Islamic terrorism, at least in Europe, but they usually condemns white terrorism. But on the fringes of the far left, there are really nihilistic people. So here it's a class divide, really. It's a low, what we call the underclass, but also some deranged left-wing elites on the far left. Here, the conservative, they officially condemn white terrorism and Muslim terrorism, but on the fringes of the far right, there are people who secretly admire some white terrorists. And even some Muslim terrorists, it's the case in France, because, yeah, so it's kind of complicated. About the question of prostitution, it's very conflicted, because on the left, some say that it's degrading for women, some say it's a way of asserting one's choices, and the same goes on the right. Usually the conservative, they morally condemn prostitution, but on some libertarians, they just say it's freedom of choice. And on the far right, they want to prohibit these kind of behaviors, of course. May 68, the legacy has to be preserved. On the right, they think it's the cause of most of our problems. What about the legacy of the white race? Usually what people think on the left, whether they are white or non-white, about whites, they come, they fight, they destroy, they corrupt, it always ends the same. And what they think on the right, yeah, but it only ends once, everything else is just progress. This comes from the TV show Lost. A dialogue, yeah. So the good aspects, which usually most people on the left agree with, democracy, equality, and universalism. This is a legacy of, historically, of the white race. The bad aspects, basically what leftists think, most leftists think is pretty much everything else. Slavery, colonialism, etc., etc. What on the right, what they think, what they associate with the white race, the good aspect, freedom, capitalism, science, and Christianity. And the bad aspect on the far right, it's ethnomasochism that they associate with the left, brother wars, and Christianity. So Christianity is praised by the moderates and rejected by the extremists in a way, usually. Colonialism, then again, good and bad aspects. Thank God it's over. But actually, the intelligent people say, oh, it's not really over. In one way or another. The bad aspect, well, everything else about colonialism. On the right, so for some right-wingers, the demographic explosion, which has been brought about by colonialism over the past 200 years, is a bad aspect. And it has brought guilt. So this is kind of what some people on the far right, how they think. So here, a 19th century French imperialist who was a leftist, but who says that Europeans had to educate the inferior races, as he called it. So he was a leftist who was openly racist. So that's why he would be on the far right today. But actually, he was a leftist in the 19th century. And of course, Kipling, on the question of slavery. While it's like a neo-colonialism, there are still places in the world where it's still practiced. But also slavery enables mostly white leftists to virtue signal, because they do not enslave anyone, but they can use the guilt which is being projected onto their ancestors to gain social status. So that's why slavery, the legacy of slavery, is very useful for a lot of white people in the modern West, because it enables them to gain a social status, basically. Okay, what the right-winger thinks about the question of slavery. Of course, we regret it, but they say usually the Muslims did it to Africans too, which is true, and eventually every people, most peoples, practiced slavery. Here on the fringes of the radical libertarian view, they say that the welfare state is a modern plantation, and they remind people that only whites abolished officially. It's not a valid error, but officially these are mostly white people who abolished or tried to abolish slavery in the 19th and 20th century. Yeah. Okay, about the question of the Holocaust, well, on the left, everyone agrees that it is shameful. On the conservative right, they agree that it was embarrassing. On the white nationalist circles, they try to remind, they agree that it's kind of embarrassing, but they try to remind that the people who liberated the camps were white too. White American soldiers and British and Russian, mostly, not all of them, but most of them, and etc. So they pretend, they say, okay, let's pretend it didn't happen. That's the view of white nationalists, a really radical right-wing. And on the fringes of the far-right extremists, they say, okay, it really did not happen. These are the negationists. But let's pretend that the negationists do not exist. They pretend that the Holocaust do not exist. Let's pretend that the negationists do not exist. That's the negation of the negative, basically. About the death of the West. On the left, usually they think that Western civilization is the cancer of mankind. On the right, they usually think that it's the cure, basically. I mean, really on the, not on the moderate right, because I'm not even sure that most conservatives or conservatives, that they are aware that there is a civilization called Western. Who cares? It's like culture. Who cares? As long as we can make a profit, basically. And on the white nationalist circles, they think that it's the greatest civilization ever. So here's a YouTuber who stands in the middle about the Christian values, a German of non-German anthropological background, but speaking German and culturally German, I guess. So here about the question of Christian values, we should welcome migrants. And on the radical left, they are coherent Christians. They should love, and we should love, the sick, the imbeciles, the poor, the degenerates, and the weak. So the anti-Christian, self-proclaimed radical leftists, they are actually very Christian. And the very self-proclaimed Christians of the right, they are actually anti-Christian, because they reject the weak and the poor, etc., and the idiots, basically. Whereas the message of Christianity is that they should be welcomed, basically. They think on the right, okay, let's go to church once a week, everything's gonna be all right. Yeah. So the real Christians, they are on the left, and the fake Christians, they are on the right, but maybe God will somehow help them nonetheless. We'll see that, whatever. Okay, virtue signaling. Yeah. About morality. Someone like Steven Pinker said it keeps getting better. Which in the view of radical leftists means it keeps getting less and less white. That's why it's getting better. The white race really is weird and strange, but whatever. And on the right, of course, they say it keeps getting worse, and they have the opposite view, because that's what they think on the far right, because it keeps getting less and less white. I know that eventually some white people, or maybe every white people who can watch this video will, some white people, they will just laugh, because I understand the white race so well that whatever. Okay, Sittlichkeit. So here, economics. Let us begin with the left. Okay. I will not comment, I will just show this. The elites promote what Mises, who is on the right, Ludwig von Mises, is here in the Austrian school, what Mises called economic destructionism. So there are anthropological conflicts between whites, and between classes, basically. So there is schizophrenia within whites because white intellectuals, leftists, they are critical of white consumerism, but they want to welcome non-whites in white country, historically predominantly white countries. So they want prosperity to attract non-whites, but at the same time they are critical of white consumerism. So they advocate ecological. I mean, ecology is not here, but there is schizophrenia. I will just show the picture. I will not comment because here are some figures of Marxist thinkers, socialist thinkers. Yeah. So here it's a white people's dream. It's on the far left, but actually on the right they dream of this as well, just to have a simple life, basically. So that's the psyche of white people expressed in movie. There is a denunciation of finance and banking on the left and on the right, and here are the views of the right-wing views of economics. Usually there are free market conservatives, neoliberals. Here it's not very rigorously structured because the neoliberals, they are more leftist than the libertarians, so it's not really coherent. But this is because these people are dead, so to speak. So their ideas are still influential, but they are more influential on the free market conservatives than on the libertarians, who are in a way more radical. So some libertarian thinkers, they are critical of these people, because not of Hayek, but of these people, because they accuse them of not being rigorous enough or whatever. So here are like classical liberals, they are still influential partly upon all free market conservatives. And here we have nationalist or statist political view. So here are examples. What could, for lack of a better classification, could be classified as techno-fascism, modern China or Singapore. Here would be nationalist economics, historically and in the modern day. And so there are free market people on the left, what I call a globalist, who advocate economic policy. Usually they are leftist. So they are globalists on the left and on the right on the question of economics. And there are nationalists, although on the left they do not call themselves nationalists for fear of being associated with a national socialist policy, but there are kind of patriotic, state-sponsored, controlled economics on the left, which would be these people, they are not patriotic socialists, but there are reactionary, patriotic socialists on the left, basically. Yeah. So here are the kind of debates which are talked about sociologically, some of the subdivisions of sociology about consumerism, what Brzezinski, I think, called a tititainment, namely entertainment by showing tits and all sorts of entertainment to dumb down the masses. But actually there's a lot of truth in some pop culture entertainment. So that's one of the trick of cultural Hegelianism, namely what might be considered as some stupid entertainment. I'm not talking about pop culture at large, because precisely pop culture is great, but some forms of entertainment which might be considered at first sight or at first glance to be really degraded and the way of dumbing down the population, they can contain really important truths. So that's a dialectical process, probably. So here, most TV shows, whatever. So here's the the view of most. I laugh because I exposed the scheme. I will not cut this part. People will judge me, but I will not cut my my outburst of laughter, because this is simply how the white, mostly white. Not only I know that there are people of Jewish origin and non-Jewish, whatever, but mostly white elites. This is how they think. Let us use taxation to steal the money from the middle class. But that's why white middle class, they are on the left, but they don't understand that the high middle class, they use taxation to steal their money. Either they enjoy being deprived of the fruit of their labor. This is a ethno-masochism. This is a economic masochism. Either they enjoy this, or they don't understand that left-wing policies consist in robbing the middle class, basically. And here are the really top elites. They use, of course, inflation to steal the money from the working class, and the typical leftist scheming consists in using the money that they have stolen from the middle class and the working class to pay, through redistribution, the underclass, to preserve more or less the social balance. So they steal from the middle of society, the top elites, the elites, they steal from the middle class and the working class to redistribute to the underclass to maintain a social balance, basically. This is typically Hillary Clinton, and Trump would say, okay, we will fight against the underclass and the elites, and we will advocate the interest of the middle class and the working class. So this 4-branch categorization, which of course is very simplified, but that's the divide in most Western countries, namely the elites are in league with the underclass. Of course, the underclass are not aware of this. They just try to go through life, whatever. But the elites are in league with the underclass against the middle class and the working class. And this is called what people call neoliberalism or globalization, basically. The globalization is not this, but what most leftist and right-wing call globalization is the process of the elites being in league with the underclass to oppress economically the people in between. And what they call populism is the revolt of the middle against the top and the bottom, basically. I simplify to the utmost. So about the question of white flight, the privileged white leftists, they can afford to escape from the no-go zones and the most unpleasant aspect of multicultural life, and the white working class, of course, they can't. Economically, they can't. That's why they vote for parties who promise that they will bring order and less immigration, etc. Because, of course, only a tiny minority of non-whites are responsible for crimes, but there are crimes nonetheless. So yeah, so the question of criminality, here are studies about crime. Some form of sexual degeneracy are found mostly on the fringes of the far left elites, but it also exists on the right. Drugs and cartels, gangs, they are financed most of the time by the institution like the secret services, CIA, FBI, etc., who finance more or less directly. I've watched American movies, so I'm well aware that movies, most of the time, they speak more truth about society than what society knows about itself. That's one of the views of cultural Hegelianism. So yeah. Serial killers. There are left-wing terrorists and, of course, right-wing terrorists. And terrorists in fictions, usually they are on the right. So yeah, in green, these are pop culture. About power, usually on the left they are statists and federalists. A statist here means a centralized state power, because all in all, usually statists are on the left and anti-statists are on the right, but usually there are anarchists on the left as well as on the right. But in the separation of power, usually it's centralization of power for the left and federalism for the right, usually, but it can be, there are right-wing centralized statists, etc., etc. About psychological manipulation, there are great schemers on the left as well as on the right. I'm not accusing Mr. Green of being a schemer, but historically Goebbels and Gustave Le Bon have been right-wing psychological manipulators, basically. But yeah. Corruption, well, there's corruption everywhere on the left and on the right of the political spectrum. Moral terror is used by constant accusation of racism, and usually the conservative, they accept to be submitted. That's why the left has the moral high ground around the question of moral virtue, etc. On the left, they endorse the welfare aspect of the welfare warfare state because the libertarians understand that they are one. And usually on the right, the neocons, although the neocons, strictly speaking, they are leftist, but if they had to be classified, they would be on the right, maybe. They endorse the warfare aspect of the welfare warfare state. So the neocons, they endorse foreign wars and domestic welfare consumption, and the left, usually it's the opposite. And although the clear-minded people like Ron Paul, they see things clearly. So here are examples of left-wing terrorists who try to implement virtue. Historical example. I'm not sure that Cromwell was a leftist, but whatever. And here are examples of right-wing terrorists who acted in their view, in the name of virtue. So there are the nihilistic terrorists on the left and on the right, but and here are examples of what could be envisioned as left-wing terrorists in a way in pop culture, and on the right as well. I'm not sure that Batman and Voldemort belong in the same team, but these are examples of right-wing values. Although Batman, strictly speaking, is a leftist, but with a right-wing mindset. And yeah. Okay. And in the middle, to stop all these problems, there is what people call Christ, maybe. Okay, in the realm of politics, let us begin with the left. Liberals. Okay, so here, liberals means, that's what there's the French translation. Liberals here means typically white liberal, what Americans call liberals, in the sense that self-hating whites, basically. Bourgeois, self-hating whites, ethnomasochistic whites. And here it's liberals in the sense of classical liberalism. So someone like Steven Pinker and the intelligent liberals, in the classical sense of the word, namely tolerance, free market for the good sense with regulation, but freedom of association, freedom of speech, equality under the law, progress, education, etc. etc. So what could be considered positive liberalism, and here, which is also positive liberalism from the perspective of modern liberals, but negative from the perspective of the right, namely these classical liberals, someone like John Rawls and the 18th century Enlightenment, basically. Those who cherish the values of the Enlightenment, they are considered, historically they have been on the left, but they are considered respectable by most conservatives. Whereas liberals, in the sense of insane white people, self-hating left-wing white people, basically. That's the perspective of the right. Yeah, they are more problematic, one might say. So we have also the Social Democrat, the Christian Democrats, the Globalists. On the far left, there are the... here they are, precisely. Those I talked about, classical political. So these people, I think John Rawls, I don't know if I think he's dead, but whatever. All people who identify as classical liberals, they are inheritors of most of the ideas of these people, basically, which are considered to be good by most people, moderate, enlightening, etc., etc. Here we have so examples of socialist conservatives: Belgium, England, Germany, classical Marxists, Stalinists, and utopian thinkers of mostly the 19th century, anarchist, romantic revolutionary left. These are illustrations of names who appeal usually to a teenage leftist. If you're a teenager, it's okay to admire these people, but when you grow up, you are supposed to realize that at least some of them were kind of whatever. But usually left-wing, mostly white, but most people, most the leftist teenagers, they admire these people. Here also I have mostly a Western perspective, as most non-white nationalists, they are on the left, because here that's why the document is far from being finished and coherent sometimes, because this is mostly actually a Western perspective. Not only it seeks universality, but it's mostly the perspective that I have adopted as an empirical level, namely that from the perspective of a Westerner, every non-white nationalist is a leftist, in a sense. Even the far-right extremists of Arab countries, Middle Eastern countries, African countries, from the Western perspective, they are leftists because they are defended by the left, basically. Yeah, that's why in the psyche here I make a remark which is important. In the psyche of a white person, only a white person can be right-wing, because a non-white is by definition a leftist. That's how white people think, basically. Most people. That's why there are so many struggles in intellectual struggles to understand geopolitics, because a Chinese nationalist or an Indian nationalist, in the mind of a white person, it's wrong to criticize non-whites because of anti-racism, because of virtue signaling. It's wrong to criticize non-whites, but it's also wrong to criticize nationalism, because white nationalism has not existed historically as a conscious movement, but the nationalism of white people in the 19th and 20th century has produced a lot of negative consequences. So that's why in the mind of a white leftist, nationalism is evil, but non-whites are good. So what happens when there are non-white nationalists? The typical liberal leftist, he has a cognitive dissonance and he fails to understand. And then it's sometimes incoherent. And on the right, we'll see on the right, they acknowledge in the fringes of the right, they grant the moral right to non-whites of having nationalist policies, basically, which from the leftist perspective, it's from a white leftist perspective is unthinkable, because basically what left-wing whites think is that non-whites are some sort of moral children. That's why, for instance, these people, if they were white, they would be considered far-right extremists. Most of them. I mean, he was white, but he was white too. But if Gandhi had been white, if a white person had wanted to emancipate his people from foreign influence, he would be considered a far-right extremist. If a white person advocated the economic interest of his own people, he would be considered a far-right extremist. So all these people, they are on the left because they are not white people, but actually, from a political standpoint, some of them are right-wingers, or even far-right people, whatever. So here's the view of the conservative movement. So the populists, the people from the Make America Great Again, the Brexit people, channels like Fox News, etc., etc. These are conservatives, modern conservatives, and these are influenced mostly upon the English, but also English-speaking. Here are the hard Republicans, and here is the view of the right in the West. You have the political libertarians, American Renaissance, who promotes white nationalism, basically. The pro-white libertarians, who are a transition between the libertarians and American Renaissance, basically. The moderate people in the alt-right community, some people in the alt-right, some people associated with Arctos, neo-barbarians, preppers, social Darwinists, the new right, countercurrents, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, basically, and traditionalists who are kind of more intelligent than most people here. The traditionalists, they are right-wingers beyond left and right, so they are really intelligent. Yeah. And we'll see. First, I will comment the left. The political. I will comment utopia. So classical utopian thinkers of the European tradition: Plato, of course, Campanella, and Thomas More. Usually, here it's not related to what's in the middle. It's just these are the topics of distinction and division and contradiction and conflicts between left and right. Liberty and egalitarianism. Liberty, of course, usually is on the right, and egalitarianism on the left. So it's here. That's what I said. It's not very rigorous, but whatever. So yeah, usually leftists are hedonists, promote hedonism, and right-wingers promote stoicism. So here are hedonistic thinkers. I'm not saying that Britney Spears is a hedonistic philosopher, although maybe she is. I don't know. Yeah, but an excess of hedonism can bring problems, but there would be Epicurus, etc., etc., and here are the classical Stoic thinkers. But yeah, so here, utopia from a non-white perspective. That's why here it's not very structured, but utopia from a, or no, sorry, no, here it's nostalgia. Yeah, so here it's spatially coherent. Nostalgia from a non-white perspective, of course, it was before whites came to disrupt our country. From the perspective of some post-colonial non-whites, some of them, maybe a tiny minority, nostalgia is when whites ruled over our country. That's what they think. In some African countries, I know that there are Africans who believe that their country was better run economically when it was officially under the rule of England or France or whatever. It's a tiny minority, but it exists on the left. There are leftist whites who would like their country to be run by non-whites, and the opposite is true. There are non-whites who would like their countries to be run by whites, basically. And the political paradise lost. The loss of the political paradise in a chronological order for most leftists in the West. It was before neoliberalism, namely before the 1980s. That's really a Western perspective, when there was a welfare state, the economy was growing, prosperity, etc. For some radical anarchists, it was La Commune de Paris. La Commune de Paris in 1871 in France. For even more radical leftist, it's the hunter-gatherer past, and what Marx would have called primitive communism, basically. So that's really the they do not have a lot of lost paradises in politics, precisely because for the left, paradise is the future, and the past, except the very, very distant past, is nothing but that's kind of weird, because for a leftist, at least a white leftist, history is nothing but an unending series of catastrophes, but they are nonetheless progressives. So there's this. It's really complicated here to think, because first I will show what the right wing paradise lost is for right wingers, at least in Europe. Yeah. So first for the bourgeois right. So for the right wing bourgeoisie, the utopia, not the utopia, the nostalgia. So utopia is what has not existed and probably will never exist. At least some things will never exist. So for a right-wing utopian, and here it's not the conservative, it's really usually the far right. But for a right-wing conservative, a utopia would be capitalism, just capitalism. For a white person, a white nationalist, it would be a white ethno-state. And for the fringes of the far right, this would be the Fourth Reich, basically. And for most people on the right, unconsciously, a political utopia is simply liberty and tribal loyalty. And here, the political utopia on the left would be communism, just communism, with no gulag. Like, they don't want any intervention, regulation of the state, and they don't want any gulag. For some people, I know this, the utopia would be the abolition of the white race, whether they are white or non-white, that would be utopia. And here also other utopia would be universal peace, free education for all, and equality and universal brotherhood. So that would be left-wing ideals and right-wing ideals, basically. And now, so this is the question of utopia. Now, nostalgia, namely states which existed in the official narrative, for educated right-wingers, of course, the utopia is Athens in the 5th century, the classical age in Greece. Athens was the symbol of commerce, democracy, the flowering of the arts and prosperity, cultural flowering, etc., etc. The Italian city-states in the late Middle Ages Renaissance, like Venice, Florence, Genoa, I don't know how you call it, not Geneva, I don't know how you call this in English, Gênes in Italian. So the city-states, but there were also city-states in the northern, towards the Baltic, the northern sea, Hamburg, and the Anse, I don't know who called this name, the Anse, in the Scandinavian, northern, some from Baltic, northern Germany, Denmark, Scandinavia, there were city-states as well. It came a little later, but in the Renaissance, late Middle Ages, Renaissance, modern period, independent cities of prosperity, commerce, and this is the ideal of the libertarian, the nostalgia of the libertarians, basically. Geneva, here it's the Geneva of Calvin and Rousseau, in a way, namely the puritanical aspect, basically. A little bit of commerce, but also puritanical Sittlichkeit, behaviors, basically. For some other, it's the early American Republic, which was, for them, utopia made wirklich. Of course, it was not utopia for the native Indians or for blacks, but for most early American settlers, America really was a utopia made wirklich. For the bourgeoisie, the right-wing bourgeoisie, not the utopia, but the nostalgia is the 19th century, because it was the ideals of liberalism made wirklich. But of course, here the problem was for native Indians and blacks, and here the problems was for the white working class in Europe and non-whites in what would become the colonies, basically. So yeah, that's why. And for most conservative Americans in the MAGA crowd, nostalgia is the 1950s of America, basically. That's why political paradise lost. There are only 4 determinations. There could be more, but usually the leftists they keep saying that history keeps improving. There is a constant progress. That's why they are not nostalgic of the past, because if the future, the present is better than the past, and the future will be even better, that's the leftist perspective, it means that the present is less good than the future will be, and the past, the further away you look into the past, the worse it is, except if you look far enough, basically. So that's why the leftists, they are, and actually it's coherent. They are not nostalgic of the past because they are progressives. Because in their view, it keeps getting better. But because it keeps getting better, when you look back retrospectively, history is an unendless series of crimes and manipulations and oppression. This is the leftist view from a white leftist perspective, but actually it's coherent. At least it's coherent. And yeah, and here on the so this is for the libertarian bourgeois right, and this is for the traditional or traditionalist right. The lost paradise is Hyperborea or the Atlantid or Avalon. Here it's for pagans. The forest of Germany before. Either before the Romans invaded Germany or before the Germans conquered Rome, basically when the Germans could live among themselves. Here the right-wing utopia, it's not utopia, it's nostalgia. The right-wing nostalgia and the left-wing nostalgia, they meet probably because they coincide because this was probably a form of some sort of primitive communism, although there were hierarchies. But yeah, this is kind of the writings of Tacitus. When, like here, I will make, I think, maybe an interesting comment, but nostalgia for most non-whites throughout the world is before whites came to disrupt our country. But nostalgia for the far-right white people, it's before the Romans, who were white, most of them, came to disrupt our country. So there's the same nostalgia, simply that what non-whites call white people, far-right white people call the Romans, who are also white. So basically, that's the narrative in these circles, namely that whites have been victim of what they call the Roman imperialism or Christianity or whatever. Okay, Sparta and the Roman Republic, before it degenerated morally into an empire. But actually the moral degeneracy coincided with the greatest cultural and economic achievements in the first to second century of the modern era, when in the second century, at the beginning of the second century, when the Roman Empire was at the peak of its extension, stability, prosperity, etc., etc. The Middle Ages, when there was an organic way of life, and for some radical people, the political paradise lost was Germany for 6 years, basically. So that's how some radical people on the traditionalist right think, basically. Okay. Yeah, and now I will make a pause because this is the view of the French system, as they call this. So I will make a pause and I will continue later. Okay, I continue the commentary. So here is an example of some of the debates, mostly in the Western world, surrounding the question of ecology. And most ecologists are on the left, but there is Linkola, a Finnish right-winger who is also on the right. But usually ecology is on the left, but the conservative, they are kind of smart sometimes. They try to to manipulate the left by saying we are the real ecologists because we want to preserve traditional way of thinking and living and inhabiting the planet. So they try to talk to, how do you call this? Yeah, to manipulate the left and the elites by saying we are the real ecologists. If you are an ecologist, join us. We the conservative, etc., etc. Yeah. Nice try, but it doesn't work, I think. The left, sometimes the left can be stupid, but they cannot be fooled by this, whatever. So here are the various subdivisions of ecology. There are the alter globalists, the vegans, Extinction Rebellion, WWF, anarcho-primitivists. So yeah, there are anarcho-primitivists on the right as well. Eco-terrorists, neo-Luddites, anti-technology. He was a great thinker, a great Jewish thinker. Permaculture. So permaculture is on the left, but there are right-wingers, usually far right, who advocate permaculture. That's why on the far left and the far right, they are in unity in a way. There are anarcho-primitivists on the far right as well. There are anti-technology people on the far right. For instance, the Amish. The Amish, precisely, they are not strictly speaking political in the sense of the modern political divisions of classification of the Western world, but they would be anti-technology, basically. So they would be on the left, but the fact that the Amish in the US are white people and that they have a lot of children would put them on the far right. So yeah, whatever. Technology. Here are the kind of debates which structure contemporary Western life, but the life of the whole world actually. The new technologies, big data, etc., etc. And here I put him on the left because JFK was a leftist, but it's not about the personal political opinion of Neil Armstrong. It's just that symbolically putting man on the moon officially. I'm not saying that it did not happen. I'm just saying that it's the official narrative of the historical process. But yeah, Neil Armstrong. Yeah, because it's the result of the will of JFK, who was a Democrat. But it's like I said, it can be. It's probably in the middle. Only God can send a man on the moon, basically. Yeah. So yeah, here left and right dichotomy. It's completely arbitrary in the sense that it's not about the personal opinion, but usually these people, they are more liked on the left. Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, they are leftists and they are admired by the left. And these people, they are considered to be more dangerous because they want to improve mankind in one way or another through transhumanism or going to Mars or whatever. But yeah, these are the kind of modern technologically minded people. And here are famous inventors. Like I said, all great inventors in the entire history of mankind could be listed here. That's why I said at the beginning of the video, it's a work in progress, and I don't know if it ever will be completed or whatever, but this is the view that I have gathered at this moment. So Greek inventors, Galileo, they are also scientists, but he invented tools, weapons of siege. He invented partly telescopes, or not invented, but he improved, I think, telescopes. Famous Italian, American, I think some of them, the radio, I think planes, modern division of labor inspired by Taylor, but also the Ford T, one of the most famous cars in the early days of the vehicle industry. One of the greatest inventors. They are very smart, these Americans, and that's mostly it comes from a book by. I mean, these names are famous, but I've listed them because of the book by Michael Hart, the 100. And in another of his book, he says that the United States of America in the 19th century was probably the greatest outburst of creative invention in the entire history of mankind. Maybe there was a 5th century Athens, BCE, maybe the 20th century, all in all. But the United States of America in the 19th century produced if you probably, if you make a sociological analysis, the quantitative determination of the population, the proportion of inventors, the impact of the inventions in science, technology, whatever. There's a lot to say about 19th century America, about the treatment of Afro-Americans and Native Americans, and later the Irish. But the modern world owes a lot of its inventions to American inventors, for good or bad. But and they themselves, they owe this to the Scots and the English, etc. But yeah, here are the media. It's mostly in the US. Here are the theorists of the theory of entrepreneurship. Ayn Rand, of course, and Joseph Schumpeter. Yeah. So here, like I said, all the explorers, here are only space explorers, but the greatest inventors ever, they could all be listed. I only put those who were in the 100 list because I haven't thoroughly worked on this, but all the great inventors could be listed. So here the media, there are examples in Germany and England of YouTube channels. This is in the US. Here are famous newspapers. In countries whose language I can read empirically. Social media. So here's the kind of yeah, there's the problem of the dark web, but yeah, I don't know what people do on YouTube. Tutorials. I have used some very useful tutorials, book channels, makeup tutorials, video about cats, music, of course, but whatever, trash talking, insults, threats, that's kind of on the social media, bodybuilding, music, of course, science and history, and ASMR channels. I don't know if she's Spanish or Italian. Yeah. Then entertainment. So here the totality of the internet and all the social media could be classified here, but there are billions of users and videos and billions of hours of content, so whatever. Okay, the entertainment industry. Okay, here I drew this in really, it took me 2 minutes. It's from personal memories, but I really don't, these are only the best. Usually the purpose is not to show only the best, but the most influential. But here, in this case, they are not only the most influential, some of the most influential, but also some of the best. So it's kind of in an order, but I haven't watched football for many years, but I guess that the greatest is Sir Alex. Guardiola, well, I'm not allowed to express personal opinions, but my favorite is probably Guardiola, but whatever. But I haven't watched football for many years, so I don't know what a football, soccer in America, but football fan would think about the classification of the great. Here again, I could list AC Milan, 89, 91, whatever. I don't know really. It took me 2 minutes. So football fans, if there are soccer fans who watch this video, if they want to improve, or basketball fan, the purpose is to be interactive. So if you find yourself in conditions where you have nothing better to do than talk about ball games and sport, you can freely classify yourself. Yeah, here are some great football players. The greatest probably is Messi, like in Messiah, and the second greatest maybe is Cristiano, like in Christ. Is that some sort of a sick joke or a divine joke? I don't know. At this point. Well, whatever. Okay, basketball players. I already made a joke in another video, so I will not remake the joke. But no one watches my video, basically, or very few people, but maybe I will not remake the joke. Basically, if you are not, if the only point of disagreement you have with all the things that I've said, showed, interpreted, categorized, if really the only point of contention is the classification of Jordan and LeBron, maybe things will be good, but unfortunately, I think that there are many more problems to discuss, but whatever. Yeah. Well, here I will be true to myself. Everything which is written here can be questioned. Everything from the beginning can be questioned, but there's one thing I will not question. It's the most beautiful woman in terms of purely a physical attribute is, of course, Emma Watson, and there are very beautiful women, but Emma Watson, the price to pay to contemplate beauty is very heavy, but Emma Watson is will probably remain the most beautiful woman in terms of physical attractiveness. She's just beautiful, so yeah. Beautiful men, I don't know what women think. For me, this would be these two people, but honestly, I don't know. Here are some examples of TV shows. So here they are more on the left. These are TV shows that I used to watch as an empirical person when I was in my teenage years. Here they are more on the right. But here I will introduce a little bit of politics. Friends has become a problem because there are only white people in Friends. Here it's the typical Protestant American family. Very weird, but yeah. So the Friends would not be tolerated 20 years later, basically. There are too many white people. This is what America was already kind of decadent, but in a good way. There's the various types of decadent in a funny, pleasant way, but it was still white. It was still okay to be white. Now it's become more and more difficult, but yeah. And here, of course, is the typical Protestant family. This show probably would not be tolerated on television today in America or in any Western country because, yeah. Video games. Yeah. Okay, again, I will make another joke. If really the only thing, if bringing a little bit of controversy in the Harry Potter franchise movies is the only, it can enable spread my view or my understanding or lack of understanding of the world. Well, maybe, but I think there are worst kind of disagreements. But maybe some people, if they watch this, if they are in a mood to laugh, maybe they will find this funny, basically. Yeah, so here, same thing, some video games. Whatever. This is a Hegelian logic for privileged Western teenagers, basically. Movies, I don't know, I've put franchises, but individual movies, whatever. Great movie directors, great actors. They are on the right. They could be on the left, but no, because Tarantino would be a leftist. Carpenter would be a leftist, very intelligent. Nolan is too smart to be either on the left or on the right. He would be with God in the middle. It's difficult to classify politically because cinema is art. It is not supposed to be political. It reflects politics, of course, and these movies cannot be understood if one doesn't know broadly at least the history of Italian Americans in the US. But and they talk about politics in one way or another. But a great movie is not an ideological. It should not be an ideological propaganda tool. I mean, even if it tries to be, if it really great, it transcends the ideological divides, and whether you are on the left or on the right, or white or non-white, or rich and poor and old and young, whatever, there are some works of art which simply transcend. This is the purpose of science and art. It's to transcend the divide. So they are on the right here, but they are actually great. So it's whatever. So here the JQ. Well, there are Jewish nationalists, white Jewish nationalists. A lot of white leftists in the high spheres are white Jewish nationalists. There are Jewish white nationalists. So these people, they are opposed, basically. So here, these are Jewish people who are more or less white nationalists. So they are opposed to their own ethnic interests, and they defend the interest of white people. So whites and Jews are kind of weird because, and then there are Jewish anti-Semites. So there are Jewish white nationalists and Jewish anti-Semites, basically. These people are Jews who attack the Jews, basically. And on the right, there are the Catholic anti-Semites, so it's a religious form of anti-Semitism. There are left-wing anti-Semites. So here, for instance, the Jewish white nationalists ought to be on the right, and the left-wing anti-Semites ought to be on the left, but because it's the classification of the JQ, I put Jews on the left and non-Jews on the right. So here you have Muslim anti-Semites. So there are religious kinds of anti-Semitism. There is economic anti-Semitism. There is racial anti-Semitism. And here these are mostly American people, and here it's traditional European anti-Semitism. And the negationists, let's pretend that they do not exist, basically. Yeah. So Marx was an anti-Semitic Jew in a way. Yeah. So here, geopolitics. But all the people in the system, they are on the left, basically. Whatever people imagine or envision is partly true, partly delirious. It can be interpreted in a way, but yeah. And there are some conspiracy theorists, but the conspiracy precisely is the separation of Geist from itself and the return into itself, and it is only by negating the supposedly I'm not saying that she's part of a conspiracy theory, it's just because she talked about geopolitics from a leftist perspective. And here there are many more. These are just examples who people who openly talk about the Great Replacement. Simply they are honest about this. So it's by revolting against the absence of a conspiracy that people, not these people, but people who start to revolt against the system, that they become spiritual and that they bring about the fulfillment of the conspiracies in a way. Not all of them, because they are contradictory sometimes, but yeah. So here I just listed the US government. So yeah. Yeah. The King of Objective Spirit, Apollonian Drum. Hopefully, Apollonian Drum, you will watch this video at some moment and you will understand maybe what I have failed to communicate for many years. That you are and will remain, whatever happens, you are the most intelligent, empirical individual outside of myself when I am smart on the world. So if you have watched this video, if you watch this video at some moment, I know that you will understand a lot, basically, and whatever. Dr. Deep State, maybe the second most intelligent in terms of strictly objective spirit, not in terms of pure intelligence, but in terms of objective spirit, namely all these topics. And here, okay, here maybe it's controversial, but that's how I interpret the world. On the left, the determination is the people who try to replace their own people and in one way or another ruin their own country, their own culture, their own civilization. So that's why all these people, they are on the left. And basically, if the criteria is the will to replace one's own people, all the politicians who do not want to replace their own people, whatever their own people is, they are on the right. That's why I know it's if people watch this, they might find this unintelligible. because it's not very clear, but actually these people, I know that officially, actually I could add all the other politicians in the world, basically. A politician in official power who does not want to replace his own people, from a Western perspective, he's a right-winger, even far right in a way. Yeah, I know that the official geopolitical alliances are very different, but actually what all the people here I put on, what they all have in common is that the policies that they have implemented over the past 50 or 70 years has been an attempt to replace the native people of these countries, basically. Otherwise, geopolitics is unintelligible, basically. And that's why Trump, he did not try to prevent the replacement, but he was on the right wing of most US politicians. That's why there are conflicts and contradictions, because Trump is despised by the totality of Western politicians, basically. And so are although strictly speaking they are leftist, but Salvini, Farage, the AFD, etc., Bannon, etc., etc. Of course, they are not consciously on the same team as some of these people, although some of them are. That's why so many right-wingers have been supporting Putin, because they saw consciously or unconsciously in Putin a leader of a partly Western country who did not consciously plan the replacement of its own people. That's why Orban is considered far-right, Bolsonaro, etc., etc. So, yeah, whatever. History. Here's a leftist scholar about 20th century history. But just in case it has to be clear, without talking about the Great Replacement, the geopolitics of the 20th and 21st century is completely unintelligible. Completely unintelligible. At least that's my perspective. And that's why Apollonian Germ is so smart, because he understands most of what I understand, basically. But then, of course, it can be debated, whatever. So, classical historians, these are historians who lived in the age in which they talked about in their writings. But here, all the historians could be listed, Gibbon, whatever, on the left or on the right. Yeah. Civilizations. So here are some of important or old civilizations. It's again from Michael Hart. I haven't had the opportunity to make a thorough study of Asian history, because it's not my purpose as an empirical individual. There are books about Asian history. Lenin and Stalin, I put them in Asia because it's questionable, but of course they are important in European history, but in world history as well. But yeah. So here are European figures of American history: Columbus, Vasco da Gama, Pizarro, Cortés, Washington, Jefferson, Bolivar, Kennedy. So leftists, I'm not sure that Christopher Columbus was a leftist, neither were Pizarro and Cortés, but precisely because the structure is that, and Washington and Jefferson. So yeah, here left precisely, yeah, the left-right divide here. It's European figures of American history, and these are figures of European history. So it's not left-right precisely, but yeah, but Kennedy was a leftist. He was a leftist. In the modern context, they would be right-wingers or even far-right extremists, but in the context of the 18th century, they were kind of leftist because they revolted against a monarchy or an empire. So yeah, and these people, of course, they are considered evil Europeans because they conquered and enslaved and killed the natives, but they have become the founding historical fathers of some modern important Southern American countries. So it's difficult to classify. So yeah, the classification is not left and right from a political divide. It's really European figures of American history and figures of European history who happens to be all Europeans. These are only some of the most important, but there are many more. Pericles, Alexander, etc., etc. Yeah. And here are some historical achievements of the European left. Reduction of working hours, free healthcare, welfare state, free education, retirement pensions, the official abolition of slavery, which, strictly speaking, was actually maybe the right sometimes, but let us attribute this to the left. The democracy, then again, to say that Solon and Pericles and Clisthène were leftist, it's a very, very dubious classification, because precisely the historical process evolves. Clisthène, Solon, Pericles, and the great names of Athenian democracy, in the modern context, they would be far-right extremists, because we are constantly reminded that democracy in Athens was patriarchy or oppression of women. It was racist. It was there were slaves. The slaves were European Greeks, but partly at some moment non-Greek, but they were Greeks enslaving one another. But it was patriarchal. It was they were not opposed to gay rights. That's a little bit of a joke. Gay people, it was okay to be gay in ancient Athens. Yeah, so I could have added gay rights, of course, in the European left. But yeah, so here are some of the historical achievements. And the French Republic, well, there's a lot to say about the French Republic, but historically it has been a source of inspiration for most people outside of France. Within no, I'm joking, because honestly the French Republic is a great achievement of the left, but then again, historically it has been leftist, but left and right here are not fully adequate. It's really simplified, whatever. And here are some of the great historical achievements of the European right: property rights, freedom of speech, freedom of association, economic growth, and demographic growth, because whatever one says, from a historical perspective, the human population has been multiplied by 7 at least, from 1 billion at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to more than 7 billion today. Without capitalism, without science, without Adam Smith, James Watt, Newton, etc., etc., the scientific revolution, Bacon, Descartes, this would not have been possible. So there's a lot to say about capitalism and the white race, but there are billions of people on this planet who, whites and non-whites alike, who are alive, and maybe there's a lot to say about life itself, but who are alive because in the historical perspective and historical narrative, capitalism, science, and the free institutions of both the left and the right, because this legacy, which can be associated with the right historically, in the case of France, was a leftist attempt. It was leftists who implemented, the leftist bourgeoisie, of course, not the leftist workers, who implemented property rights, freedom of speech, freedom of association, against the right-wing aristocracy, which was not right-wing because it thought of itself as beyond political divide. So that's why I will not make a lecture on European political history, but because symbolically the French Revolution introduced the left-right divide in politics, but it already existed before. On the ground, the foundation of this is conflicts between determinations of human beings, so that there are left-right conflicts within each society, even the most primitive ones. We call this left and right since the French Revolution, but it has just been the Wirklichkeit, the becoming actual of through the realm of political institution, of a ontological divide, maybe. So that's why most of these achievements can be attributed to the left, and the reverse is true, because without hard-working right-wing people, the welfare state, healthcare, free education, pensions would not be possible. Yeah, and here I wrote yeah. So here historiography. So here all the historians, usually left-wing historians have a strictly economic Marxist perspective, and right-wing historians, they have either a racial perspective or a religious cultural perspective. So race, religion, and culture are on the right, and economics are on the left. Usually it's really simplified, but like I said, this is not, this is a work in progress, whatever. Okay, absolute Geist. Here are classifications of the Enzyklopädie. So art. Here I try to illustrate the left-right divide with Harry Potter. Hufflepuff, they are dumb and hardworking and nice. Gryffindor, they are courageous. Slytherin, they are very cunning, very smart, and pretty dark. And Ravenclaw, they are very smart as well. So I'm not saying that there are no intelligent people on the left and no courageous people on the right, but it's just to illustrate. Maybe I wish I should have started with this. Can we use Hermione's necklace to revert back in time and start a... No, we can't. No, because it's dangerous to mess with timelines. Yeah, I know. Yeah. If it enables people to understand what I've been talking about, then maybe thank God for Harry Potter. But Harry Potter is not just Harry Potter, it's also whatever, a lot of trouble with werewolves, dementors, Death Eaters, etc., etc. So here, all forms of pop culture can be classified on the left and on the right, of course, all forms of art. Here I just listed from, I think, a dictionary, some great authors, Russian writers, English poets, not English writers, English poets. Only here are some great English writers, and Scottish and Irish, Italian poets, ancient Greek literature, Spanish literature, well, German literature, and American literature. That's why the idea that white Americans have no culture is one of the most ludicrous ideas ever heard of. Because the majority of modern pop culture is American, and here's some of great aspect of white American culture. In the realm of purely absoluter Geist, then there is the Sittlichkeit, the ways of life, etc. But here's a culture as thought about by the educated people, as they call this. Here, architecture, painting, sculpture, poetry. See here, all the architects, all the painters, all the sculptors, all the poets of mankind could be listed. And here, then again, a left-right divide. Here, it's purely formal. It's not political. It's just because I had to put people on the left and others on the right. But yeah, religion. So here are some various divisions of spirituality. Here are some modern YouTubers or modern spiritual teachers. Yeah, witches and magicians. Yeah, native world spiritualities. What could be called paganism as opposed to Christianity or to Islam or to Judaism, namely the native religions of peoples, whatever the origin, before the revealed religions of the holy books, whether the holy book is the Quran, the Bible, the Torah, the Veda, the Bhagavad Gita, or whatever. Cosmic consciousness. Here are modern people who had cosmic experiences, spiritual experiences, through a consciousness of the spirit of the cosmos, for lack of a better expression. It's just the cosmos becoming conscious of itself through the mediation of these people. And these people talk about this as well. He wrote books about cosmotheism in a way. And here, more right-wing people. So here there are far-right people, but who actually advocate very spiritual idea, and so they are in unity with the left. William Pierce, Rosenberg, Davy, they defend the kind of the same ideas as those people who are leftists. But yeah, here in the middle, one of the most God-conscious mind in the world. He's an Afro-American. Empirically, but at this level of consciousness, it's not really important anymore. It's just cosmic consciousness, divine consciousness. Yeah. Here, of course, all the religions. So, modern Christian theologians, modern Catholics, in whom the spirit of Catholicism lives partly. Inspired Protestants. I mean, she does not necessarily identify as a Protestant, but she's very inspired, and I think she's a Protestant. And classical Protestant theologians. I put PKD among theologians because he was a theologian. He did not always identify as a Protestant, but he's a Protestant theologian nonetheless. Some important figures of the Catholic Church, the Pope, of course. Here, I don't know if Mr. Abozit will watch this video, or maybe in French, I don't know, but the idea that Abozit, Adrien Abozit, is more inspired than the Pope. Maybe if he hears this, he will laugh. Yeah, whatever. He's spiritually inspired. He comes from Algeria. He's a Muslim Sufi, of course. Muhammad. So here are historical figures: Jesus, Saint Paul, classical theologians. Muhammad, Rumi, Jalal ad-Din Rumi, who was a Sufi, a Sufi Muslim. Moses, of course. Buddha. So here it's connected. Jesus and Saint Paul, they were Jews officially, but Christian Jews, although he began as an anti-Christian militant, but they were Jews. He came from Arabia, or the Arabic tribes of the Arabic desert, basically. He was Persian. And Moses, well, we cannot know, but he was a Jewish, basically. Buddhism, a Buddha. So the Dalai Lama, he is a Buddhist. Hinduism. I'm not sure that Philosophy Cat is a Hindu, but she talks about the Bhagavad Gita. She's more of a traditionalist, but whatever. So here's the question: where does Hinduism come from? Is it a European religion? I mean, these people were not Europeans, but was it written really by Europeans? Probably, because it's written in Indo-European language. But this kind of question that in the Hindu community they ask themselves. The Sikhs. I will just make a little bit of a joke. Yeah. So here's the joke. Here are the Sikh And here are the sick as well, but they are not the same kind of sickness. Mr. Dawkins, if you hear this joke, you will be forced to acknowledge he had a great sense of humor. Only a British person, an atheist British person, can understand this joke. Maybe you are the perfect person to hear this joke, Mr. Dawkins. There's a lot to say about you, but yeah, whatever. Okay, Confucianism, Taoism, Shinto, animism, etc., shamanism, and here the European view of paganism, but basically all these faiths could be called paganism if by paganism we mean non-revealed religion, native faiths, basically. So every people historically, or prehistorically, or even historically, but usually when they came into contact with world history, they ceased to be pagans. That's the story, basically. There are very few people who remain pagans through the historical process. Some incorporated elements of the native faith, like the Shinto, but usually to enter history means to leave aside the native spirituality, basically. I simplify to the utmost. But here, this is strictly speaking European paganism, and here the left-right divide makes sense again. So these people, they are on the left, but they could be on the right as well. So here it's really Jesus would be in the center, but the great prophets, the great spiritual figures, religious figures, they would be precisely, they would be in the middle with God, maybe. Not either on the right or on the left. So they are on the left here, but it's not political. Here, then again, these people, they are traditionalist right-wingers, so they are on the left, because I have to divide Catholic and Protestant. That's not what I meant. I don't want to divide the Protestants and the Catholics. There's already enough division everywhere. Let's not divide the Christians. Basically, what I mean is that's not what I meant. What I meant basically is that for a formal presentation, there are Protestants and there are Catholics. There's a left side and a right side, and I put the Catholics on the left and the Protestants on the right. But it's here the politics is not really relevant. Like I said, since we entered the realm of absolute spirit, the politics is not really relevant. Although it can be, but yeah. So here, for instance, it's relevant. However, here are really left-wing pagans. More or less pagans, then whether they identify as a heathen, a Wiccan, whatever, they are pagan, basically. And here, right-wing pagans. Yeah. And these people are some of the most inspired people in the world, because they understand the process and they understand, at least broadly, the determinations of the entirety of the process, at least in the broad view. And most spiritual people, with the exception of these people here, they understand aspects of the process, but or of God or of spirits, but not the full picture. What differentiates these right-wing pagans is that they have gone through most of the steps. That's why they have grown and developed spiritually, basically. So here are the atheists. Yeah. Here occultism, the view of the end times in the various religions. Whatever. And philosophy, which is the conceptual, systematic organization of the totality of being, becoming conscious of itself. And here are people who talk about philosophy or science, right and left here, it's not really relevant. The theory of everything. I tried to show the formal. This video consists in showing the formal aspect of the theory of everything, basically, because it's physical. The theory of everything from a physical standpoint. What I'm trying to show is the theory of everything from the point of view of everything becoming conscious of itself through various modes and moments. Here are the Zeitgeist, as they call this. So here's what world spirit expresses. It's not only here. World spirit expresses itself everywhere, but here are really smart ideas usually. And it reflects the Zeitgeist for those who can watch these videos. And here philosophy, it's a go back to the start. And here are the classical distinction of pure philosophy, namely logic, ontology, metaphysics, epistemology. And I added Hegelian studies. And here are some modern Hegelians, people who I don't know what to believe in terms of I know that if they watch some of my videos, they will understand, because they are intelligent Hegelians. They are all leftists, but they are really intelligent. Yeah, one of the questions that I have asked myself for many years now is, what do people, intelligent, educated people, what do they understand when they read Hegel? Whatever. Here are modern Hegelians who they are on the right, but actually, like I said, Hegelians do not take side. They switch from one to the other. So he's kind of a traditionalist Hegelian, but he's a communist. He's difficult to classify politically, but he's very intelligent. These people are very intelligent, and so are these people. So these are really modern, very intelligent Hegelians, and yeah. So if they watch this video, they will understand a lot. I'm sure, because yeah. And yeah, here are Hegelian scholars in chronological order. These are only a few examples, those that I have in my library empirically. I haven't read all of them because I've read Hegel before reading the Hegelians, but yeah, this is chronologically ordered. And the people in red or green, they are really great Hegelian scholars. I know that Harris also is a great Hegelian scholar. But one of the ideas of cultural Hegelianism was to explain that Hegel could only be made intelligible once all the false interpretations of Hegel had been made, and because I understood this idea 4 years ago, basically. I understood Hegel before reading Hegel, or only at the beginning, that if all these interpretations, and here all the Hegelian scholars of the past, officially the past 200 years, can be added. If all the interpretations of Hegel that have ever been made have been false, if all of them are false, they are no longer false. They are a moment in the process of truth coming to consciousness of itself. In the language of the official language of Hegel, it's a moment of the organic unity, what is in conflict, are moments of the totality, whatever. I know enough. I don't need to quote Hegel any longer because I understand, basically. So all these people, most of them are here are no longer living empirically, but their ideas are still alive. So that's why whatever Hegel is, whatever I say against Hegel or whatever, in a way, this is amazing. The level of complexity, it's just if we said Hegel is just a philosopher, let us say Hegel is a 19th century German philosopher, and his philosophy consists that it can only be understood by the interpretation, the idea that Hegel, that's the idea that I developed 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago when I started to develop cultural Hegelianism, namely that Hegel would come back to comment his own commentators. Just this simple idea. We leave aside the entirety of the process from logic, nature, Geist, etc. etc. If Hegel was just this process of this would already be amazing, although kind of strange, but that would be amazing. But Hegel is much more than just this amazing feature. There's a lot to say, but at this point, I don't know what to say about the writings of Hegel. It's just so... I don't know what to say. But I must, to be honest, with myself, with Hegel, with God, there's an aspect, even the most questionable aspect. It's still amazing in a way. From an intellectual standpoint, it's simply amazing. I don't know what to say. It's and I don't know if Hegelian scholars, whether them or others, will one day understand the broad view of whatever. It's really here basically just all the Hegelian scholars of the past 200 years, officially they could be listed here, and I'm sure that their interpretation of Hegel, if it is contextualized within the process, even though the interpretations may be wrong or lacking or whatever, I'm sure that at some moment it's intelligible. So that's why here we are reaching a level of intellectual complexity associated with kind of intellectual brilliance, and yeah, I have no words as of now, because yeah, yeah. So here are some Greek philosophers, Roman philosophers, Anglo-Saxon philosophers, German philosophers, Jewish philosophers, and Italian philosophers. All philosophers of all countries could be added, but I took those that I could list depending on the circumstances. But every typical Englishman comes out of the mind of these people, basically. And the reverse is also true. These people come out of the mind of the English, I mean, because they are English, but or Anglo-Saxon or whatever, or American or whatever, but there is a reciprocal determination, maybe, that the Anglo-Saxons produced Anglo-Saxon, I mean, I'm not sure that he would identify as an Anglo-Saxon, but whatever. Anglo-Saxon philosophers, the Anglo-Saxon people produces Anglo-Saxon philosophers, and the ideas of the Anglo-Saxon, they influence the English and the Scots, the Americans, etc. for generations and generations, and they end up all thinking like the typical Anglo-Saxon thinker when they think, but most of them do. That's why Anglo-Saxon scientists, they come straight out of the mind of not Bacon, not Hobbes, Bacon, Locke, Hume, Russell, etc. And the same is true maybe of the Germans. Yeah. And here, finally, we reach cultural Hegelianism. Namely, it's just the process thinking itself. And here is my vision of Germany. Here are Germans that I have not categorized yet, but I tried here to balance. So the Gottheit is the deity, the Abgrund and the Urgrund, the eternal free will, the German metaphysical family, one might say. Here, Leibniz, Heidegger, it's not really... the structure means basically Hegel is the unity of Nietzsche and Kant. Eckhart and Boehm, they are theologians, speculative, mystical thinkers. Schelling and Fichte, they kind of complement one another chronologically, historically, etc. But here really, I haven't studied enough all the other German metaphysicians to make a structured view, but basically they all revolve around Hegel, basically. Here it's German theology, Martin Luther in the center with Cusa and Oettinger on the sides. German poetry, Novalis with Sehnsucht und Heimat. These are not poets, these are determinations of the German soul, basically. Goethe with Schiller and Hölderlin. Wolfram von Eschenbach with the Grimm brothers. Richard Wagner, probably the greatest musician ever. It's either Wagner or Beethoven or I don't know, probably Wagner. And modern German music, which is great as well in a different style, but it's great as well. So here are the classical musicians, and here are more modern, but pop culture can be truly great. That was one of the messages of cultural Hegelianism. Leni Riefenstahl, modern German movie producers. Well, right-wing German politics and left-wing German politics, the purpose is to find the proper balance between the two, to be in the middle, not too much on the right, not too much on the left, and if it goes too much in one way or another, to try to find balance in the middle, thanks to some of Hegel's best ideas. Yeah, it is part of Germany. If I wanted really to make, at this point I will make a dubious joke, he was Austrian, but precisely Germany consists in saying that Austria is a part of Germany, but he was really a joke for the people with a great sense of humor, or people who find themselves in position where let us laugh sometimes, because yeah. What would Germany be without a little bit of humor? Here's Wotan. Here's an important aspect of my vision of Germany. And yeah. This is my vision of Germany. As of now, and maybe maybe forever, I don't know. This is my vision of the kingdom of God, basically. So, yeah. Yeah. So, that's how I envision the Phänomenologie des Geistes. And the totality of the process enables to understand Germany, and maybe Germany enables to understand the totality of the process. Maybe they are reciprocally determining one another, I don't know, but yeah. What I said at the beginning of the video is that God was in the center, so